14 years ago, I realized that I believed in the old adage that if you can't have the girl you love, then love those around you. At the time, I was engaged to the girl of my dreams and we were happily anticipating our upcoming wedding. Before we met, she had been working as a tour guide on the estate for a year, and thanks to her excellent knowledge of Portuguese, she was offered an opportunity she couldn't refuse. I realized that after all she had experienced in Natal, Brazil, she would never be satisfied with an ordinary life as an ordinary wife in a Scandinavian capital. I expressed to her my gratitude for the time we had spent together and wished her all the best in her future endeavors. The gods of luck didn't take too long to favor her, and a month later she met and fell in love with a pilot from Brazilian Airlines. They got married soon after their 1-month contract ended. Then I met AI Catherine, who did her best to comfort me during this difficult time. Suddenly, AI Catherine became pregnant and she convinced me that I was the only possible father. My boss suggested that I take evening courses, and on his advice I enrolled in them, and thanks to the connections I had gained in the construction company we were lucky enough to build a beautiful house in a popular area, and when our daughter turned 3 we were able to enroll both children in the nearest kindergarten. Our children, now 14 and 12, are both doing well in school, and at 37, IE is still as beautiful as ever and has recently taken up a position as head of department for an insurance company. I reluctantly agreed with her, even though I still didn't know exactly what she was calling a boring dinner party, but contrary to her assertion, the promotion party had a much bigger impact on our marriage, and unfortunately, it wasn't for the better. 00 When she got home, she was clearly drunk, with her hair disheveled and her makeup smeared. Naturally, I raised the possibility of cheating with her, but she flatly denied any misbehavior. After the party, however, our relationship took a decidedly different turn, to the detriment of me and the children. The changes brought about by her promotion did not do our family any favors, and our once stormy and intimate life was now completely gone. At first, I accepted her explanation that her workload was causing her to be too exhausted to enjoy intimacy. After 3 weeks of this behavior, I couldn't shake the idea that she was having an affair with a coworker and that I was only secondary to her. During a lunch break at a restaurant in the city center, I unexpectedly ran into a close friend of ASSY's from work, who sympathized with me, believing that I wasn't well enough to attend the joyous celebration arranged to celebrate ASSY's promotion. She sympathized with me, believing that I was not well enough to attend the joyous celebration arranged to celebrate ASSY's promotion. To my surprise, she told me that coincidentally, one of the company's executives was accompanying ASSY during the party as his wife was on vacation with her parents. I realized that she might have inadvertently revealed too much information, and she abruptly refused to explain further. 2 weeks later, I decided it was time to take action because the insurance policy on our house and property was issued in my name and I had to renew it. After dropping Company C's coverage, I spoke with a customer service representative, and as she entered my data into the computer, she seemed a bit impatient and asked uncertainly, "Excuse me, but doesn't your wife work as a general manager in this building?" This is exactly the kind of question I was hoping to hear, as it could be a catalyst for gossip in the company. As it turned out, I found a much better policy from one of your competitors. Thanks for your help, and I wish you all the best. And an hour later, a man named Nick called my office and introduced himself as the manager in charge of dealing with privileged clients, and he offered to indemnify me for their mistake and asked me what I wanted, and considering we were talking about the cancellation of a relatively small policy, it's unlikely that this would have been a reason to retain a lucrative client with such urgency. Catherine would probably be upset if she knew her husband was the only spouse not invited. If you feel you need to make amends, please let me know exactly what they are. Hall's company may have inadvertently overlooked my wife, and as a result she feels like a puppet. Perhaps we can discuss a fair way to resolve this oversight. There's no need to get hung up on it, and why don't you, my friend, send you a new Mercedes 300 as a token of our apology, and let's put this in the past and move on. In addition, I can offer you a 25% discount on your homeowners and homeowners insurance for next year. That's a fair deal, isn't it? On a separate note, I must express my disappointment in your company as a whole. It seems that everyone in the company is acting irrationally. As soon as I stepped through the door she started yelling, "Why are you calling me and creating a scandal while I'm at work?" I'm running a responsible business and saving for our family's future, and you're calling me crazy. That's not fair. Why would you want to embarrass me at my workplace for the first time in our marriage? I was furious with her and I yelled, why are you humiliating me at your party and acting like a cheap company? I know I was the only spouse not invited. It was you and your lover who didn't want me to attend, perhaps to garner favor for their promotion in an inappropriate way. I found her cell phone and charger in the kitchen and realized that she hadn't left the bedroom in a long time. Curiosity made me decide to investigate her phone and found that it contained a number of text messages, the most important of which was from someone named Nick, apparently the same Hall who had called me earlier. I found a copy of her last reply, which stated that he had made significant progress in his career, that he referred to the fantastic night they had shared as the best night of his life, and that there were even clear hints of deception in their correspondence. I also discovered that she had spent 3 Friday afternoons at the Scandinavian Hotel, and I noted that her immediate plans included a trip to the Scandinavian Hotel the following Friday, and a romantic dinner at the Spanish restaurant Elred the following Wednesday evening. I was pleasantly surprised to find my former Brazilian lover, Elle, and her brother in the bar, and they enthusiastically invited me to dine with them, and we chatted happily for a couple of hours. I was saddened to learn that she had divorced her husband, who was a captain and was finding it difficult to resist the temptation of tantalizing flight attendants. The problem seemed insurmountable and we agreed to meet again the following month when she returned to England to see her son. When I went to work the next morning, she was still asleep. My boss noticed something was wrong with me and invited me to tell the whole story of my failed marriage. He assured me that he would use his connections to provide me with a comfortable apartment and offered to recommend to the board of directors that I be entrusted with insurance calculations for an upcoming major project. Years he was a 44-year-old married man with 2 daughters aged 21 and 18 still living at home. Interestingly, he held a management position as a department head at the same insurance company where my unfaithful spouse worked. To my surprise, 10 minutes later she arrived at the hotel accompanied by a man of about 40 years of age, and they went to the cafeteria to buy coffee and sandwiches. "I'm glad you came," because she was silent. I turned to the man accompanying her and apologized. "I'm sorry I didn't introduce myself earlier. My name is Anders and I'm IE's husband. May I ask who you are?" The man replied that it was Nick Thompson. I realized that this was the same man who had called me at work, and I couldn't help but express my amazement at his low opinion of IE's merits and demerits. As we sat in the car, she screamed, "You told him what I was worth?" "When he called me at work, he offered to make it up to me for what happened at the night's party, and your friend Nick offered about 10% of what the average escort would charge for similar services, and naturally, I refused his offer." She said she was going to the bachelorette party regardless of my objections. I didn't object and sincerely wished her a good night. She left in a cab, and 10 minutes later I drove to the LGR, and since there were very few customers in the restaurant I got in easily. When I told her that he was having an affair with my wife and that I had just seen them at the LGR, she assured me that she would talk to him face to face with renewed determination. "I think you realize that you have little or no chance of winning a confrontation with me, so you remain silent because neither of you want to talk, and let me move on because the bachelor party has obviously been cancelled, and we'd better get home right away. But if you're hungry we can have a snack first. Nick, it's time for you to end your chess game with your ex-boss, because your wife is on her way over here, and I'm sure she'll be interested in finding out what happened at the promotion party." The truth about what happened a week later: the board of directors approved my boss's recommendation, and I was assigned a highly capable and charismatic female assistant who, unfortunately, was already in a serious relationship. Our main task was to ensure the compatibility of the insurance companies by offering them equal conditions and avoiding hidden pitfalls. This task was very important as there were significant financial stakes at stake, but we succeeded in obtaining the desired benefits from the selected insurance company. It is worth noting that this company was the only local company among the project participants, and it was also the smallest among the companies considered. In this case, I found myself in the role of a very valuable client. I was personally contacted and invited to lunch by the company's managing director, and my boss provided invaluable input and advice on what to expect from the conference, beyond our initial expectations. The launch was held at one of the best restaurants in the city and was attended by senior managers and heads of departments of the insurance company, including Ashi and the chairman. ACI was surprised when she noticed my Armani suit and had a strange look on her face when she tried to sit next to me. At the beginning of the dinner, the chairman gave a warm greeting to all the distinguished guests, and I took the opportunity to stand up and address them. My name is Anderson Erickson, and my wife is Elle Catherine, and she is here today, and I'm glad to hear that Miss Hogan and I are both honored guests of yours, but I don't blame her, and it's entirely up to you to decide who you invite to an event such as this. But if in the past I've considered myself unworthy to share a meal with my wife at your company's table, then today I do too. And the room was silent, so silent that even the drop of a pin on the room was silent, so silent that you could hear a pin drop on the soft carpet. It wasn't until Lena got up to leave that Irene hurried away from the table. In addition, I know of one of the conspirators who later had the audacity to ask your company to compensate me for less than 10% of what a cheap girl would have paid for such a meeting. Obviously, he was referring to my wife. Now I think it was my ex-wife, whom he had an extremely derogatory opinion of, and he had the audacity to offer such a low amount of compensation for the loss of my wife's reputation, and in response I offered a cheap Mercedes-Benz as compensation, but it was obvious to him that in his opinion, AI Catherine's value was only a small fraction of the value of a corrupt woman. But I must state that I could not sit at a table with Mr. Nick Thompson present. Again, it was a choice, it was either him or us, but this time there was no silence. The chairman's voice rang out and Thompson walked away, with the result that nothing of note happened for the rest of the lunch. When I got back to my office, I played back the recording of the conversation Lena had quietly conducted in the outside meeting with a tape recorder hidden in her purse, and my boss was pleased with it and fully supported the arguments I had made at the luncheon. I found a note on the kitchen table addressed to the children in which she asked them to contact her parents for more details. Our children lived with her, but they used to spend a considerable amount of time with me. Em asked me to forgive her until the last minute and dreamed of us living together again and raising our children together. She had a hard time finding suitable employment because she was laid off, and for that reason she had to move to another state to find a decent position where she became romantically involved with a coworker. Strangely enough, she never mentioned this to me or the kids until last week, when she was hospitalized with a serious injury. When my children and I saw her, we were shocked. She was covered in bandages and the doctor told us that she had a serious spinal injury and would never be able to walk or sit again. My children also promised AIEE that they would support her morally and materially. AIEE's sister was planning to send her to a residential home for the disabled as she had no opportunity to take care of her disabled sister, and I didn't seem surprised that our children also refused to take care of AIEE. Story 2. About 10 years ago, I joined a surviving cheating group for support in dealing with my wife's repeated cheating behavior. She broke the sacred promise we made when we got married and decided to get involved with several other men. This unfortunate story of cheating led to the breakup of my second and first marriages. Shockingly, my first wife cheated on me regularly, and I found out that she even had a child with her lover only during the divorce process. Did I do things I shouldn't have? Was I unfaithful? But the truth is, you've always been faithful, you've never thought about betrayal, so where did it all go wrong? In my first marriage, I found out that my wife had been subjected to unimaginable abuse by relatives and assaults by classmates. I can say that maybe it wasn't the wisest decision to marry her, but if I hadn't, I wouldn't have my cherished children. Let me tell you how it all happened. After the dissolution of my first marriage, I found myself in a vulnerable situation when a young and kind blonde woman came into my life. But what's a man to do considering my situation? Her attraction and genuine interest in me was too much to resist. It all started in 1998 when I discovered 6 of her novels, most of which related to her work as a registered nurse. In addition, she had an affair with another man, a nurse, a doctor, a nurse practitioner, and even a medical equipment salesman, and she indulged in these behaviors in the workplace, which ultimately led to her dismissal. During this time, she underwent 2 breast augmentation surgeries, the second of which resulted in double Ds, which led to undeserved admiration for her body. For the past 4 years, she has been dating another man. All the while, I have been responsible for raising my children, running my household, managing my finances, and fighting the looming threat of foreclosure. This woman who claimed to be my wife was a scoundrel who had been unfaithful 6 times with her new partner, who had even built a new house. After a series of events over the 4 years, she decided to move, which in retrospect was a slight relief as I was left to look after 3 children on my own, aged 10, 17 and 20 at the time, and just a month after she left, I was diagnosed with a horrific case of prostate cancer, and 6 months after she left, tragedy struck, when our oldest daughter of 25 and her boyfriend were involved in a horrific car accident. That took their lives. 2016 was an extremely difficult year, almost as tumultuous as what we are facing in 2020. We owned a large 3,000 square foot house that was renovated and ready to be sold, but despite all of our efforts, the house remained unsold, and we didn't find a single interested party during 3 difficult years. Years of struggling, and finally at the end of 2019, when the kids and I had moved into the apartment, the court finally gave us a full refund on the house before it was worth $600, and remarkably, her father even provided her with a large down payment of $200,000. Unfortunately, the story doesn't end there, and even though, in this case, we decided to file a joint income return, because it would reduce the significant tax liability, but even in this case, I found myself having to pay a huge amount of taxes, and although she promised to pay the 2016 taxes, she did not fulfill her promise, and in 2018, I received a frustrating notice from the IRS that my debt was $3, and in order to solve this problem, I finally found a way to pay off my taxes. Luckily, the IRS was lenient and canceled the penalty, and I only had to pay the interest. Fast forward to 2019, when the foreclosure was completed and the bottom was fired, I thought that was the end of the matter, but much to my chagrin, I was wrong. Given the difficulties that arose with the foreclosure, I had no choice but to seek the help of a financial advisor in order to resolve the tax issues related to the foreclosure, but luckily, I received 2 incentive checks in one lump sum, which I wisely used the money to pay for these unexpected expenses. I have informed her that we will be filing separate tax returns from now on and that she is solely responsible for her affairs. In addition, I have made my expectations clear, emphasizing that her cooperation in the divorce process is mandatory. I decided to take a tougher stance and demand a substantial settlement of the dispute, including spousal support and other necessary benefits. Unfortunately, my personal experience convinced me of its far-reaching effects. I have experienced many difficulties, from the daunting task of ongoing bankruptcy and selling my home, to the unbearable grief of losing my daughter, and I feel caught in a complex web of issues. Her infidelity created a destructive cycle that led to 6 infidelities, and by the time the 6th betrayal occurred, we had 3 children and had moved to Florida, which complicated our already challenging lives. She moved out 4 years ago and we haven't lived together since. This separation has brought me a sense of peace and is better for our children. Our daughter was hit and killed by a police officer who was speeding and failed to turn on his lights and siren, but I explained to her that this trial would likely drag on for years. Years-old daughter. In addition, due to her misconduct at work, she was forced to work on an hourly basis because she had not been able to find a place to work nearby. I made it clear to her that in the future we would file our taxes separately and leave her alone to suffer the consequences. There is no doubt that I am entitled to a childcare tax deduction when I pay my taxes this year. As for my personal life, my life became difficult after I developed prostate cancer. In addition to raising my children, which keeps me busy and fulfilled, my journalistic activities bring me joy and attraction. I am not currently actively looking for a new relationship, as my uncles Simon and Goff used to say. I find solace in books, poetry and music, which are my protective barriers. I seek help from psychologists to cope with life's difficulties, but I have also learned to endure them thanks to past experiences. The loss of my father at the age of 6 and the fact that my stepfather was not actively involved in my life fostered resilience from an early age. My Jewish background also gave me a source of strength. Finally, after a long wait, she got the divorce papers, which caused her anger. She asked me why I was getting divorced now and advised me to wait a few more years, but the reality was that she was earning more money and didn't have the responsibility to take care of our children. She really doesn't seem to understand my situation and that my only desire is to get out of this marriage, but she doesn't understand why I can't wait until our youngest child turns 18 in 3.5 years and finishes school. In addition, she views my statement about needing to end the marriage for her own peace of mind as disrespectful to her children, and at the same time she does not recognize her decision to live with another married man as disrespectful to herself. I assured her that if the court made any ruling, especially in Florida, that alimony was mandatory, I would return the money to her because I was not looking for financial gain, but she replied to me in disbelief, "No, I don't believe you. Now let's think about the 25 years that we have lived together, and as far as I can tell there are 6 things that she has done in those 25 years that have deserted our marriage and neglected our children. It's obvious that she spends little time with our children, she puts her own needs first, at the same time, paradoxically, she doubts my credibility. Well, believe it or not, we are going ahead with the divorce. I'm not a simple person, I've already covered the cost of an attorney, all she needs to do is fill out a questionnaire, take a parenting class, and sign a divorce decree. If she decides to hire an attorney, then that is her choice and it is her responsibility to cover the costs, not mine." Unfortunately, due to her refusal to pay the mortgage or co-owner service fund, we lost the house, resulting in foreclosure. Unfortunately, she refuses to cover the costs and we are currently in Florida where there are established calculations for determining the amount of alimony, but she is afraid to honor her obligations, citing the possible negative impact on her creditworthiness and the possibility of purchasing a new car for a lease within the next 18 months. May purchase a new car for leasing purposes within the next 18 months, and that she just wanted a divorce and did not want to incur any financial obligations. She even threatened to claim my pension if she had to pay alimony, even though I repeatedly said I didn't need alimony because I didn't need her money. Even before the pandemic, her contact with her daughter was minimal, and regular Sunday visits of a few hours were the limit of her involvement, and that did not include overnight stays or extended periods with her daughter. Although I am 65 years old, I continue to work and plan to work until my daughter graduates from high school, and if necessary, I may decide to pursue spousal and child support. The children did not celebrate Thanksgiving because she claimed that she no longer participated in turkey-related celebrations. In addition, Christmas was not celebrated without her participation or contribution. Birthdays always bring disappointment, especially when you consider how she and her married boyfriend built a new house. Daughter, my main task was to complete the process as economically as possible, as our 14-year-old daughter is still our only joint property, but I had a feeling it would not be easy as we had only just begun and there was a good chance I would have to defend my position depending on the circumstances. Despite the odds, I stood my ground, but at the same time I realized the benefits of being flexible, and like Willow, I would adapt and recover, and any opposition would be futile. Florida's alimony laws are pretty strict, so I'm not too worried about that. Today I met with an attorney and in less than a month we will have a hearing to consider the case. I'm trying to fulfill all the necessary requirements, including taking parenting classes, which is part of what I hope will bring this process to a close. My attorney is handling most of the complicated details, allowing me to focus and move forward decisively. If all goes well and she doesn't take unconscionable action to force me to sue her, then everything could potentially be resolved by the new year. It took me 5 years to come to the conclusion that I would have to take care of the kids and keep the accounts after she left, even though she was earning more. In addition, I had to deal with other issues that life put in front of me. For nearly 30 years, I have endured difficulties, including the painful loss of my daughter, the raising of my other children without a mother, the painful process of losing ownership of my home and, for 4 years, paying her and my income taxes alone, which totaled approximately $113,000. This year, I filed for divorce and took the necessary steps to legally divide our finances, giving her the opportunity to assume her financial responsibilities as a matter of course. What would have happened if I had decided then to stay with someone who could give me a lifetime of loyalty and friendship? The truth is, if she had been capable of loyalty, I would have stayed with her and been faithful to her. Against all odds, she was an excellent student, made excellent grades, and showed amazing resilience during her freshman year of high school. I often think that if I had only one wish, I would want my children to be born without a problematic partner. If any of you have unused or extra magic rings to share, I would be eternally grateful for your blessing, and while that would be a wonderful gift, it doesn't seem to be happening right now. In addition, my 25-year-old son lives with me. I must admit that moving on is not only difficult but very unpleasant, as I have been through 2 divorces and I feel that my lot in relationships is very bleak. My life seems to have always revolved around my children, whom I love very much and will always put first, and it is obvious that I have no one else in my life but them. Over the past 45 years I have been through a first marriage, then divorced, into a second marriage and now a second divorce, and it all seems to have flown by without me realizing it. It pains me to admit that both times I found myself with people who were not only prone to single mistakes, but serial cheaters. When I think of the possibility of conversing with a higher power, if I am lucky, and if the situation permits, I will undoubtedly be asked some difficult questions, such as "what are you thinking?" and the like will undoubtedly come up as I seek to understand and clarify that there must be some deep reason behind the circumstances I find myself in, and that perhaps it has saved another ill-prepared soul from a more serious and difficult fate, and that whatever the explanation, it had to be a good one. I stared at this message for hours, contemplating its implications. I used to usually scold her to make her realize that I wasn't her father, and her reaction to my negativity used to be often related to our children, but I was tired of the constant drama and meaningless exchanges, and I was just tired of this. While I may not agree with what she wrote, I realized that sometimes it's better to let go than to sow bitterness within yourself, and let's face it, she's not really going to get swallowed up by a funnel or adopted by aliens, so I decided to move on and focus on what really matters. Age: we met on a dating site and were looking for a serious marriage partner. Many of our friends and cousins already had kids, which put some pressure on me as a single guy in his 30s who hadn't been in a serious relationship in a long time. I felt the same way, and we immediately found a common language and realized that we had great empathy for each other, and even though she lived in a neighboring city, she was ready to move to my city because her company had a convenient transfer policy. We often discussed the topic of marriage, and I often spent the night at her place, as she sometimes did. It was an unbelievably happy time in my life, in my opinion the best thing that ever happened to me, and although I had fallen in love with other people in the past, this relationship was special to me. We decided to fly to her hometown where she wanted to spend a week with her aunt and family. The truth is, I'm not confident enough to even approach someone of the same sex, let alone a girl. Before Anna, I had only been in one relationship, which eventually fell apart due to my inability to open up and bond with my partner's friends. I was determined that I would never allow my identity to destroy that special bond. For this reason, I tried to do everything I could to connect with Anna's friends and family, which was one of the reasons I decided to stay with her and get to know her loved ones better before she got married. During this visit, I had the opportunity to meet her stepbrother, Brian. Brian was close to the deceased and he empathized and grieved her loss. I noticed that he was usually quiet and timid, which made me understand him even more, as I myself understand how difficult it is to be an introvert. When I asked about this, Anna said that her family held on to traditional values and had been in the construction business for generations. It all started with her great-grandfather, who started small but eventually expanded the business and divided it among his children, thus setting the stage for them to pass it on further. I found this family story really fascinating. Even though Brian didn't talk much about his personal life, Anna approached me with a request that I use my connections to help him create an art gallery. Although I work for an e-commerce company that specializes in the sale of antique jewelry, I wasn't sure I knew anyone directly related to the art industry who could actively help Brian, but I willingly agreed to help because I was sure I would find a solution or connect him with someone who could offer advice and support. Our week-long stay at Anna's house was very peaceful and fulfilling, during which I had the opportunity to meet her relatives and learn about their unique traditions. Having been born and raised in downtown Los Angeles, I had never been exposed to such a different culture before and I thoroughly enjoyed the experience. Upon returning home, Anna told me that Brian expressed a desire to move to Los Angeles to continue his career. But over time, I noticed a change in Anna's demeanor, even though she seemed much happier than she had been before Brian moved here. At first, I respected her wishes and didn't question them, but as time went on it bothered me more and more, and unfortunately, Anna didn't seem to notice that her behavior was starting to annoy me and even cause me to hate her. He lived with us, and at first I didn't mind her cooking seafood for the first week, but seafood was on the table every other day and it was getting on my nerves. Sure, I may have come across as rude, but when I finally spoke to Anna about the current situation, frustration built up inside of me. She replied that she didn't have time to make 2 different dishes to solve the problem, and I suggested that they could sometimes skip the seafood and make something that I might enjoy eating. Considering that Brian is now living with us, not paying rent, and eating free food, I think he should take on some of the chores. After all, he's not just a guest in our house anymore. Yesterday, the tension reached a boiling point and I offered to swap responsibilities. I would cook and Anna would clean. I was further frustrated by Anna's cynicism, and I resisted the urge to yell at her and try to explain to her that I work 45 hours a week and can't possibly stay in the kitchen indefinitely. The truth is, their behavior became so obnoxious that it began to affect my interactions with Anna and Brian. Anna's unwavering defense of her brother increased my distaste for him to the point where I wanted him to find a new place to live as soon as possible. I began to wonder if my behavior was unwittingly indicating that I was doing Brian a favor by allowing him to live with us, but it must be noted that I sincerely did not think so, and Anna's attitude toward the situation continued to give me pause. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to all those who listened to my complaints and offered their valuable input. The next day, I decided to subtly broach the subject of meal planning at dinner with Brian present. But Anna rolled her eyes as if to make it clear that I shouldn't bring up the subject in front of Brian. Surprisingly, Brian quickly agreed to my suggestion and even apologized for his earlier inconsiderate behavior. While one of the issues was resolved, or at least alleviated, I may have unnecessarily exaggerated the situation. I'm not sure if it was my limited thoughts on the art field or Brian's own lack of certainty about his career plans. But today, I'd like to share with you another issue that's been bothering me. I had a relatively light workload last week. I know it might be ridiculous to assume anything bad between a stepbrother and stepsister, and maybe I'm just being presumptuous. But it was hard to see Anna and Brian sitting so close to each other, while at the same time pushing me away on the grounds of fatigue or bad mood. It was a very delicate issue for me, and I hesitated to tell Anna because I was afraid of appearing inadequate or being branded, but I really needed some serious advice on what I should do. I must admit that recent events had become one of the most difficult and painful experiences of my life, and unfortunately I had found Anna and Brian in a compromising position, and although I had had an uneasy feeling when he had first moved in, I had chosen to leave him out of the picture, and even as I was writing the previous news I couldn't. But then a few days later I came home early to find that my house had been locked up, and I couldn't get into it. As per usual, neither Anna nor Brian were home, but the house was locked that day. I decided to go out for a run and relax. Luckily, I found myself at a civilian park in the neighborhood. I immediately stopped in my tracks and they followed my example and stopped in their tracks. I found myself looking straight into Brian's eyes. I approached them and asked what they were doing, but instead of realizing the gravity of the situation, she kept her amazing composure and casually replied, "Oh, hi, we're here." I offered to go home and he didn't say a word. The meeting left me completely confused and I could barely speak. When Anna finally called me to dinner I gave her a piercing look, but she just asked me in confusion why I was so nervous. I silently finished dinner and went to bed. I couldn't restrain my feelings any longer when Anna came to the bedside and tried to embrace me. I expressed my chagrin at witnessing her and Brian in a passionate embrace, but she dismissed it by saying that it was just a warm gesture between half-siblings. It was only later that I realized that Anna was playing mind games. She showed no signs of shock or remorse, nor did she apologize because, in her mind, the whole thing was insignificant, simply because they were half-siblings. But a new problem arose. Brian was home a lot and I didn't know what he could do. I realized that Brian's work ethic wasn't serious and felt his presence in my home, and I realized that I had to find a way to get him out of it. In preparation for the trip, I said I needed to work from home for a few days to finish an important presentation. When I knew that Brian would be at the house, I noticed that Brian was dressed in formal clothes with a folder, pretending to go to an interview, and although I couldn't be sure that he was just acting, I couldn't help but suspect that something was wrong, and taking advantage of this opportunity, I quietly installed several cameras and microphones in different parts of the house. Unfortunately, despite my efforts, nothing concrete was found in the footage from the surveillance equipment during the entire observation. The brief intense contact between Anna and Brian's gentle touching of Anna's hand as he passed by were all recorded. But I declined her kind offer because my flight was scheduled for the evening, and to save Anna a lot of trouble, I assured her that I would be leaving directly from the office to the airport, and that she didn't need to take me to my appointment. I waited patiently for Anna to return from work in the evening. She called me when she got home and asked me if I had arrived at the airport. I told her that I had already boarded the plane and that it was about to take off, and that I had put my cell phone on flight mode so as not to disturb her, as I expected that Anna might call to inquire about my trip. My marriage just fell apart before our eyes, and I was too overcome with heartache and despair to look any further. But an hour later, I mustered up the courage to log back into the app, desperate to see if there was enough evidence to end this terrible ordeal. Upon logging back into the app, I came across a wonderful video in which Brian stumbled upon one of the hidden cameras, which caused him to panic as he and Anna frantically searched for the rest of the cameras and microphones. Unfortunately, the recording came to an abrupt halt at this point, suggesting that the remaining equipment had been destroyed, but I was able to extract several important clues from what remained of the recording, clues that irrefutably proved the illicit connection between them. I firmly told her that she should feel lucky that I had not resorted to violence or pursued her lover, and urged her to drop the nonsense and get to the point. Anna and Brian signed an agreement that they would never formally marry, but would continue their secret affair. However, when Anna turns 30, the pressure from her traditional family increases and she is forced to look for a suitable husband from another city to fulfill their plans. It was at this time that she overheard my desperate desire to get married as soon as possible, which led to our union, but we didn't know each other for long. Anna suggested that I maintain the appearance of a married couple but live separately so that I would have the opportunity to have an intimate relationship with anyone, and she offered to enter into an open marriage so that we could live independently under the same roof. I gave her an ultimatum, limiting her to 1 day to move out of the house and back to the hotel where I was staying. The next day, I received a message from Anna that she had indeed left the house. Over the next few days, I reflected on my future and drank my sorrows, even though they are not important to this story. Anna's further actions only exacerbated my misfortune. I was surprised to find that Anna had told her parents that I had been stalking her, installing cameras and microphones throughout the house. I found Brian's number from the family group and sent him a copy and a message thanking him for not sharing the videos in the family group, and almost immediately, Anna's voice messages flooded my phone accusing me of betraying her trust. I assured her that I would not make her behavior public, and while that sounded like a promise, her subsequent denigration of me in front of my family left me no choice. In this case, it was clearly necessary to consider reporting the incident to the police before I was accused of domestic violence. When I told my parents that I had never been violent towards Anna, they expressed concern about the time it would take to prove my innocence. I decided to give up on the more difficult and troublesome aspects of life. I decided to give up on more difficulties and troubles in my life, and it was important that I move on from this painful chapter and focus on reshaping my future given the circumstances. I decided to stick to the simple and straightforward terms of my divorce, which we called a settlement. While it seemed that I had finally awakened from a long and painful nightmare, I was now faced with the reality of being alone again. I realized that I needed time to heal and get through this difficult period, so I was going to give myself the space and time necessary to recover properly. But things got worse for Anna when her mother wrote to me saying that I needed to get checked for sexually transmitted diseases because Anna had contracted syphilis from her half-brother, and it later turned out that Brian had not only slept with Anna, but had used her to move in with us, and in fact he was bisexual, and had a boyfriend in our town, and that boyfriend had infected him with syphilis, and then Anna was infected as well.